In 588 BCE, 75,000 souls resided within the most formidable and secure defensive walls in the entire ancient world. 18 months later, a mere 10,000 remained alive. This demographic collapse seems historically improbable. Jerusalem boasted stone fortifications rising 40 feet high and 20 feet thick, possessed enough cached food reserves to last for years, was defended by elite, battle-hardened soldiers, and, according to its people, enjoyed the direct protection of God himself. So how did a Babylonian king manage to extinguish an entire city in under 2 years? The definitive answer lies not in overwhelming raw power, but in calculated surgical strategy. Nebuchadnezzar II did not assault Jerusalem like a conventional warlord. He executed a plan so meticulously engineered and utterly brutal that it is still studied in military academies today. More chillingly, he transformed state-sponsored destruction into an exact, replicable science. The antique world's deadliest fighting force relied on more than just overwhelming numbers. Nebuchadnezzar commanded an estimated 180,000 highly specialized troops, trained and equipped for one singular mission: the systematic demolition of entire urban centers. According to the prophet Jeremiah, they advanced from the north like a devastating storm, consuming everything in their path. But this was not merely a matter of troop count. It was about technological superiority that no existing enemy could counter. Their massive, torsion-powered catapults hurled 200-pound stones over 600 feet away with terrifying accuracy. Their primary battering rams, built to weigh more than 20 combined oxen, pulverized thick bronze gates as if they were dried kindling. And their revolutionary mobile siege towers ascended to heights of 100 feet taller than a modern 10-story building. Jeremiah 4:13 describes the terrifying spectacle. "Look, he advances like the clouds, his chariots are like a whirlwind, his horses are swifter than eagles." Even more terrifying, Nebuchadnezzar never improvised. Every single attack followed a meticulously refined manual of war, tested and perfected across dozens of previously conquered cities. Nineveh, Ashkelon, Lachish, all fell using exactly the same methodical approach. The Babylonian king had elevated destruction from an act of conquest into a perfect, exact science. But why would such an overwhelmingly powerful empire expend years of effort and immense resources on a minor city like Jerusalem? The geopolitical answer is startling. Jerusalem was small and desperately poor compared to the sprawling opulence of Babylon. So, why did Nebuchadnezzar spend 2 decades attempting to decisively crush it? The answer, surprising as it may be, rests entirely on the map. Jerusalem, though modest and impoverished, was the essential geopolitical linchpin. Situated precisely along the central trade route between Babylon and Egypt, the 2 reigning superpowers of the era. Whoever controlled Jerusalem held the key to all continental commerce and military movements. Crucially, Jerusalem was firmly allied with Egypt, Nebuchadnezzar's greatest rival. According to 2 Kings 24:7, the king of Egypt did not set out from his country again, for the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the Wadi of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Nebuchadnezzar knew that as long as Jerusalem stood, Egypt always retained a hostile forward operating base deep inside his zone of influence. It was a perpetually pointed dagger aimed directly at his back. There was also the unquantifiable element of pride. Other kings throughout the Levant trembled merely hearing Nebuchadnezzar's name, yet the Judeans audaciously asserted that their god was mightier than any earthly army. This defiance infuriated the Babylonian monarch. For Nebuchadnezzar, destroying Jerusalem was not merely a military necessity, it was an unequivocal, global demonstration of power. No city, no matter how divinely protected it claimed to be, could dare defy Babylon. However, Nebuchadnezzar was far too shrewd to launch a head-on assault immediately. First, he executed a devastating psychological strike. Nebuchadnezzar did not arrive breaking gates, he arrived smiling. In 605 BCE, his forces encircled Jerusalem but held their attack. Instead, the Babylonian king offered a proposition that sounded deceptively generous. Surrender a select group of noble youths for education and assimilation in Babylon, and he would spare the city. King Jehoiakim accepted instantly, viewing it as a favorable compromise. Daniel 1:3-4 recounts that Nebuchadnezzar commanded that they bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand. Among those taken were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the most brilliant young minds in Jerusalem. Jehoiakim believed he had secured a clever deal, saving his city by sacrificing only a handful of youths. But Nebuchadnezzar was infinitely more cunning. He wasn't just collecting hostages, he was decapitating Jerusalem's future. By removing the intellectuals and potential leaders, he guaranteed that the next generation of Judean governance would be trained in Babylon, not Judah. Furthermore, by accepting this arrangement, Jehoiakim had implicitly declared himself a vassal of Nebuchadnezzar. Without realizing it, Jerusalem had forfeited its independence. The first strike was not military, it was a perfect psychological annexation. But 3 years later, Jehoiakim committed the blunder that would force Nebuchadnezzar to return with blazing fury. Jehoiakim's successor, Jehoiakim, lasted a mere 3 months on the throne. In March 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar arrived personally with his full, terrifying army. This time, there would be no smiling proposals. The 8-year-old king looked down from the towering walls and saw a host of soldiers stretching to the horizon, as recorded in 2 Kings 24:10-11. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it, and Nebuchadnezzar himself came up to the city while his officers were besieging it. Jehoiakim endured for exactly 3 days. On the 3rd day, he did what no previous king of Jerusalem had done. He opened the gates and surrendered voluntarily. 2 Kings 24:12 registers. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his officials and his court surrendered to him. Nebuchadnezzar was reportedly surprised. He expected a brutal resistance, but encountered total capitulation. The progressive siege strategy had completely crushed Jerusalem's morale. Fear had proven more effective than any catapult. Nebuchadnezzar immediately exploited this moment to sack the temple for the first time, stripping it of some sacred vessels and loading 50 wagons with gold and silver. But most critically, he took Jehoiachin alive back to Babylon as a living trophy. The king of Jerusalem was now a prisoner of war. This was the second time Nebuchadnezzar had utterly humiliated Jerusalem, yet it was still insufficient. Nebuchadnezzar did not execute Jehoiachin. He had a far more intelligent plan. Instead of outright regicide, he implemented the very tactic that had destroyed other nations: decisive social decapitation through mass deportation of the elite. 2 Kings 24:14 lists the exact numbers. He carried all Jerusalem into exile, all the officers and fighting men, 10,000 exiles, and all the craftsmen and artisans. Only the poorest people of the land were left. It was not merely random people. Nebuchadnezzar specifically selected the nation's human capital: the leaders, the intellectuals, the skilled artisans, and the soldiers. Everyone who possessed the knowledge to govern, fight, or construct was ripped from Jerusalem. Among the deportees was the prophet Ezekiel, who would later detail the final destruction of the city. The plan was chillingly brilliant. Leave only the time's poorest people of the land, time's simple peasants and shepherds who lacked the capacity to lead a meaningful rebellion. Nebuchadnezzar installed Zedekiah, Jehoiachin's uncle, as a puppet king, a weak man controlled remotely by Babylon. For 11 years, this strategy functioned perfectly. Jerusalem became a ghost town, governed by a king with no real authority and inhabited solely by the destitute. Nebuchadnezzar believed he had solved the problem of Jerusalem forever. But Zedekiah was about to commit a blunder so catastrophic it would force Nebuchadnezzar to return a third time, and this time to destroy everything. For 11 years, Zedekiah served as the perfect puppet king. He paid tribute, obeyed orders, and kept Jerusalem docile. Nebuchadnezzar was satisfied. The Jerusalem problem appeared resolved. But in 588 BCE, Zedekiah committed the blunder of the century. He rebelled against Babylon. What could compel a weak puppet king to challenge the most powerful empire on earth? Two things: overwhelming popular pressure and hollow promises from Egypt. According to Jeremiah 37:5, Pharaoh's army had marched out of Egypt, and when the Babylonians who were besieging Jerusalem heard the report concerning them, they withdrew from Jerusalem. The people of Jerusalem saw the Egyptian army approaching and believed they finally had a formidable ally. They relentlessly pressured Zedekiah to break the treaty with Babylon. Zedekiah succumbed to the pressure. 2 Kings 24-20 states clearly, "It was because of the Lord's anger that all this happened to Jerusalem and Judah, and in the end he thrust them from his presence." Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. It was the most costly mistake in the history of Judah. When Nebuchadnezzar learned of the betrayal, his reaction was explosive. There would be no more treaties, no more vassalage, and no more chances. This time, he would come to erase Jerusalem from the map. The final destruction plan Nebuchadnezzar devised was so brutal that even his own generals were reportedly shocked. If you believe that God always delivers justice, even if it takes time, comment, "God is just," and show your faith. In January 588 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Jerusalem with a strategy that never failed. But this time was different. He desired neither fealty nor tribute. He demanded total extermination. 2 Kings 25-1 marks the beginning of the nightmare. Now, in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem and encamped against it. The siege was not chaotic. It was a masterpiece of military engineering. Nebuchadnezzar constructed a colossal counterwall, a ring of permanent fortifications around the entirety of Jerusalem, effectively creating a city encircling another city, circumvallation. Not a single person, animal, or kernel of food could enter or exit. Jeremiah 52:4-5 describes it, "And they built siege works all around it." So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. He divided his army into relentless 24-hour shifts. While one division attacked the walls, the other rested. The pressure was constant, day and night, without pause. Most brilliantly, Nebuchadnezzar was in no hurry. He knew that time was his loyal servant. Jerusalem had food for a few months. He had supplies for years. Jerusalem's morale was shattered. His soldiers were energized by the promise of complete plunder. It was simple mathematics. Hunger would defeat the defenders long before fatigue affected the attackers. Jerusalem prided itself on its walls, built of massive stone, which had resisted sieges for centuries. But Nebuchadnezzar had meticulously studied every single brick during the previous encounters. His engineers had mapped every weak point, every fissure, and every vulnerable angle of Jerusalem's sophisticated defenses. The walls were 40 feet high and 20 feet thick, impressive but not insurmountable. Nebuchadnezzar deployed his most advanced siege engines, massive wheeled battering rams, catapults that launched flaming projectiles, and specialized sappers trained to undermine foundations. Jeremiah 32-24 describes the technique. "See how the siege ramps are built up to take the city. By the sword, famine, and plague, the city will be delivered into the hands of the Babylonians who are attacking it." The comprehensive strategy targeted 3 simultaneous points: the weaker north gate, the taller eastern tower and the southern foundation built on challenging bedrock. While the rams battered the gates, the sappers diligently dug tunnels beneath the foundations to destabilize the structure. The catapults maintained a continuous shower of projectiles, keeping the exhausted defenders pinned down. For months, it seemed the walls would hold, but Nebuchadnezzar was relying not merely on force, but on the ruthless application of mathematics. Each ram strike created micro-fissures. Every rock from a catapult loosened mortar. Every day of excavation minutely undermined the structure. The impenetrable walls were slowly collapsing from within, and when they finally fell, the massacre would be inevitable. Nebuchadnezzar deliberately transformed starvation into the most lethal weapon of the siege. In the first month, Jerusalem rationed food. By the third month, people were eating tree bark. By the sixth month, they boiled sandal leather. 2 Kings 25:3 records. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city became so severe that there was no food for the people of the land. But the horror was only beginning. Lamentations 4:10 describes the unthinkable depths of depravity. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed. Mothers cooked their own infants. Families fought savagely over moldy crumbs of bread. Corpses rotted in the narrow streets because no one had the strength left to bury them. Nebuchadnezzar watched it all from his command tower. He knew precisely what transpired inside Jerusalem because he maintained a network of infiltrators and refugees fleeing the city, who recounted tales of cannibalism and utter despair. The Babylonian king felt no pity. He viewed it as successful execution of his grand strategy. Lamentations 2:20 echoes the agony. Look, Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have tenderly cared for? When Jerusalem's soldiers were too weak to hold their swords, Nebuchadnezzar knew he had won. Famine had accomplished the task thousands of soldiers could not. After 18 agonizing months, the moment Nebuchadnezzar anticipated finally arrived, the final breach in the wall. In the early hours of July 18, 586 BCE, the inevitable occurred. The wall fractured. Jeremiah 52:7 records the exact moment. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled. It was not a dramatic collapse, but a 10-foot crack in the north wall, enough for 10 soldiers to pass through side by side. The Judean guards saw the gap and screamed, "The wall has fallen." Total panic seized the city. Zedekiah attempted to organize a desperate defense, but his soldiers were too starving to fight. Many simply dropped their swords and fled. The first Babylonians through the breach were archers, who immediately scaled the towers and began raining arrows down on the fleeing defenders. Within 2 hours, Jerusalem's organized resistance had disintegrated. 2 Kings 25:4 describes the chaos. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the 2 walls, which was by the king's garden. Zedekiah did the only thing left to him. He ran, escaping like a coward. Nebuchadnezzar observed the invasion from the heights of his royal tent. After 2 years of planning, 6 months of war machine construction, and 18 months of brutal siege, Jerusalem had finally fallen. But the city's collapse was merely the prelude. Now came the part Nebuchadnezzar had been awaiting, the calculated retribution. Nebuchadnezzar forced the fleeing Zedekiah to watch the unthinkable. First, they brought in the king's sons, young princes who were one day destined to inherit the throne of Judah. Zedekiah pleaded for their lives, offering gold and promising eternal vassalage. Nebuchadnezzar offered no response, merely nodding toward the executioner. 2 Kings 25:7 registers the chilling finality, and they slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in bronze fetters, and took him to Babylon. Zedekiah's anguished screams echoed across the Babylonian encampment. But the worst was yet to come. After executing the sons, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the slaughter of every captured noble of Judah. Jeremiah 52:10 confirms, "The king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. He also slaughtered all the officials of Judah at Riblah." It was the complete extinction of the Davidic royal lineage. Finally came the ultimate punishment for Zedekiah himself. Babylonian soldiers gouged out his eyes with hot iron. The last image the king of Jerusalem ever saw was the blood of his own children pooling on the ground. Nebuchadnezzar ensured that Zedekiah would spend the rest of his blind life remembering the exact moment he lost everything due to his treachery. This was Babylonian justice. Those who broke oaths lost everything. Those who betrayed allies paid with blood. But Nebuchadnezzar was still unfinished. The next target was the spiritual heart of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar reserved the temple for last, for one strategic reason: he wanted to crush the very soul of Israel. Solomon's temple was not merely a building, it was the sacred symbol that God resided among the Judeans. Its destruction would prove, unequivocally, that the God of Israel had abandoned his people. On August 5, 586 BCE, Nebuzaradan, captain of the Babylonian Guard, entered the Temple Mount with torches and axes. 2 Kings 25:9 records, "And he burned the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down." First, they systematically stripped everything of value. The massive bronze columns of Jachin and Boaz were shattered and carried away in pieces. The enormous bronze sea, weighing 30 tons, was broken apart with massive hammers. Jeremiah 52:17 lists the unprecedented plunder. The bronze pillars, the stands, and the bronze sea that were in the temple of the Lord. The Babylonians broke up and carted all the bronze to Babylon. The gold vessels, the silver cups, and the candlesticks filled 200 wagons. But what shocked even the hardened Babylonian soldiers was when Nebuzaradan ordered the incineration of the Holy of Holies. The most sacred spot on earth turned to ash in a matter of hours. The fire raged for 3 days. The smoke was visible 30 miles away. Judeans, hiding in the surrounding mountains, watched the horror unfold, knowing it marked the absolute end of an era. Lamentations 2:7 echoes their pain. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has delivered the walls of her palaces into the hand of the enemy. 1,000 years of sacred history were reduced to dust in 72 hours. But the temple's destruction was only the prelude to the calculated massacre that followed. Now comment, God is just if you believe that evil never goes unpunished, even if judgment is delayed. For the women who survived the massacre, death might have been a forced mercy. Lamentations 5:11 records the horror without euphemism. They ravished the women in Zion, the virgins in the cities of Judah. Nebuchadnezzar had granted his soldiers 3 days of free plunder. This included doing whatever they wished with the captured women. Wives of nobles who had lived in palaces were raped by blood-soaked soldiers. Daughters of priests were brutalized in the ruins of the temple courtyards. Mothers protecting their infants were assaulted in front of their own children. The youngest and most beautiful were separated, marked for sale as sexual slaves in the vast Babylonian markets. The older women were forced to carry the spoils of their own demolished city. Lamentations 1:18 expresses the despair. "Hear, all you peoples, and behold my suffering. My virgins and my young men have gone into captivity." Those who attempted resistance were killed instantly. Those who submitted were branded with hot iron as property of the Babylonian army. Mothers lost sons, daughters lost mothers, sisters were separated forever. Lamentations 1:16 expresses the inexpressible sorrow. "For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears." Hundreds of women, once respected queens, princesses, and daughters of wealthy merchants, walked in chains through the streets of their ruined city. They carried on their backs the very gold and silver from their own homes, now the property of Nebuchadnezzar. But not even human suffering was the Babylonian king's main focus. He wanted something far more valuable, all the accumulated wealth of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar had not come to Jerusalem merely to conquer territory. He came to steal 4 centuries of amassed wealth. The looting was meticulous, organized like a military operation. Jeremiah 52:17, lists the robbery inventory: the bronze columns, the stands, the bronze sea, the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the basins, everything of gold and everything of silver. In the temple alone, the Babylonians discovered an estimated 650 tons of pure gold and 1,300 tons of silver, plus thousands of sacred utensils and precious stones embedded in the walls. In the royal palaces, they plundered the treasures of 20 generations of kings, the crown jewels of David and Solomon, the national gold reserves, ivory, spices, and fine fabrics. 2 Kings 25-13 details. They broke up and carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away everything that was gold and everything that was silver. Nebuchadnezzar organized 500 wagons solely to transport the precious metals. The convoy of stolen wealth stretched for 9 miles. The final irony: much of this gold had been donated voluntarily by the Judeans as offerings to God. Now it would fund pagan temples in Babylon. Lamentations 1:10 expresses the bitterness. The adversary has stretched out his hand over all her precious things, for she has seen the nations enter her sanctuary. In 1 week, Nebuchadnezzar stole what Jerusalem had taken centuries to accumulate. The city built with the gold of Ophir had turned to dust. The wealth intended to honor God ended up decorating the palaces of idols. But robbing the city was not enough. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to ensure that no Judean could ever rebuild Jerusalem. If this deep dive into biblical history has impressed you, please leave a like to support more documentaries like this. In August 586 BCE, for the first time in 1,000 years, Jerusalem was completely empty. No human voice, no smoke from a kitchen, no sound of children playing, only smoldering rubble and the sound of wind whistling through the holes in the broken walls. Lamentations 1:1 captures the desolate silence. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become, she who was great among the nations. King Nebuchadnezzar II's strategic, calculated plan had come to fruition flawlessly. The mighty siege engine of Babylon achieved absolute and crushing victory. Jerusalem, the sacred city and jewel of Judea, was utterly erased. It ceased to exist not merely as a collection of stones and citizens, but as a sovereign nation, a distinct cultural identity, and any conceivable threat to the expanding power of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Its walls lay in ruins, its temple desecrated, and its people marched into exile. Yet amid the triumph and plunder, one profound mystery remained unresolved, a theological paradox that would echo through history itself. Why would the God of Israel, bound by covenant to this people, permit such total destruction and humiliation to befall his own chosen nation? The conqueror seized the land, but not the logic of the divine surrender. This question would reverberate for generations, shaping belief, theology, and historical debate long after the dust of Jerusalem had settled. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of ancient history and biblical mystery meaningful, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments and supporting the channel by leaving a like. Until next time, may curiosity guide your understanding of the ancient world.